James Harden wants to be traded from the Houston Rockets. We already know this, okay? But when you look at history in the NBA, when you trade one of those stars, you always lose the trade. So I started thinking about this more because you can go back through history and see some awful transactions. But if you focus on just the last 10 years, where the trade demands by the star player have been more often than ever before, it's happening basically every few months, you think, is there a chance, as I went into this study, that the team that loses the trade loses in a nicer way? I know that sounds crazy, but let's examine it. We'll start in 2011. Carmelo Anthony, he wants out of Denver, doesn't want to play for the Nuggets anymore. Remember, people were mad at LeBron James just for leaving Cleveland in free agency. There was an argument to be made at the time that Melo at least was telling the Nuggets he was leaving, so you might as well get something for me. And they got some things for him. They traded Chauncey Billups and Melo to the Knicks for Wilson Chandler, Raymond Felton, Timothy Mozgov, and Danilo Gallinari, and a pick that was very important. Those are real pieces, real players. People actually criticized Melo saying, look, if you were going to just go to the Knicks and only the Knicks, because there was a chance that Brooklyn deal could have happened, he was like, look, I'm going to go there in free agency, so you might as well get something for me. Why would he want to tear down some of these other pieces? But he didn't care. He wanted the Knicks. He wanted the Knicks. He got the Knicks, and he got his money. But there was a pick in 2016 for the Nuggets that worked out. It was Jamal Murray. So even though on paper you go, you don't want to give up Melo. You get some role players back. Nuggets put together some nice regular seasons. They ended up with Jamal Murray in that transaction. And the craziest thing, now look, no one wants to say, hey, in 6 years we're going to draft a player that 10 years from now we feel really, really good about. That's not exactly a plan, but it's also not a terrible one-sided trade loss. In 2011, Deron Williams was traded from the Utah Jazz to the Brooklyn Nets. This one was a lot quieter than Melo and a lot quieter than a lot of the ones. That was just very Utah. Hey, this guy's not happy. It's not working out. Let's move him now and see what kind of package we can get back. Now, if you were to take a star player and say, can we guarantee that we trade you, our guy, for 3 top 5 picks, not these first rounders in the 20s that are completely overvalued and now to the point where everybody's just giving them away, so maybe they're not overvalued anymore. But with Deron Williams, it ended up being 3 top 5 picks coming back. That's actually a pretty good price. The problem is it was Derek Favors, nice player, not great. Devin Harris ended up doing all right in Dallas later on, and Enes Kanter, who never really worked out with roster and has kind of bounced around the league a lot. So the players didn't necessarily work out, but 3 top 5 picks, you don't really get that for any kind of player. So then we've got Chris Paul, who was, as we know, almost traded to the Lakers, and he ended up going to the Clippers once the Lakers deal was vetoed. And New Orleans, in return, got back Al-Farouq Amino, role player. Chris Kaman wasn't a bad center there for a little while. Then he wasn't a great center. And Eric Gordon, who's been a nice player, but I think we all know is not exactly a leading man, and the first-round pick that ended up getting you Austin Rivers. So all guys that could play, and a lottery pick that ended up having a career, but unfortunately, you're trading one of the best point guards of all time in his prime. Not exactly an even swap. Hey, what about Paul George? Don't worry, folks. We have 2 Paul George chapters for you. The first one was 2017, traded from the Pacers to the Oklahoma City Thunder for Victor Oladipo and Domas Sabonis. Now, this deal actually ended up not being that bad for the Pacers. In a tough position, like all of these teams that have to trade their guy. Oladipo was pretty dinged up rep-wise. Not that he's a bad guy, but people were just down on him. They were very down on the contract. I actually thought at the time, I was like, this is okay. It's not that bad. I got crushed for even suggesting that. It ended up not being that bad. Now, if Oladipo can get back to the guy he originally was with the Pacers, this is still a pretty good deal, and Sabonis has been a really nice player, and Oklahoma City ended up getting a return on their investment a little bit later on. So now you're thinking, hey, Rye, some of these trades actually aren't terrible. So are all of the teams doing all right when they trade their superstar? Well, let's take a look at Cleveland in 2017 and the Kyrie Irving deal before we get too carried away. Now, look, I'm not the biggest Kyrie guy, but Kyrie demanding a trade a little bit later in the offseason process was him being frustrated that LeBron was just going year to year, and that we all know that Kyrie potentially was going to be traded for somebody else to help LeBron in Cleveland. So Kyrie's like, look, I'm out of here. I don't want to deal with this. The problem is he didn't really want to go to Boston, and I don't think Cleveland really wanted to deal with Boston, but that's the deal they ended up taking. They got Jay Crowder, a hurt Isaiah Thomas, Ante Zizic, and a pick that ended up becoming Colin Sexton. That is a bad haul for somebody like Kyrie, who you can make fun of now, but a year removed from that three-pointer against Golden State, this is a special offensive player. You have to do better than that deal, and Thomas wasn't with the team. Crowder was out of there. I mean, honestly, none of these pieces other than the hope for Sexton has meant anything, so that deal ended up being an absolute loss for the Cavs. Let's look at the Chris Paul deal from the Clippers to the Rockets. Remember, everybody just thought Chris Paul, max deal, extension with the Clippers. He was happy that he was going to stay there. He's like, no, actually, I want out. I want to go to Houston, and let's figure this out contractually for me so that you can get some pieces back. And they got some pieces back. There's a bunch of other stuff I'm not going to get to here, but the key components, Pat Beverly, Montrezl Harrell, and Lou Williams. I did have hope for Kyle Wiltshire a little bit, but those are 3 role players. Not the young potential franchise breakout player you'd want maybe in another deal, but Houston didn't have that guy. And look, they do that deal again for Chris Paul, but in that case, the Clippers actually were able to salvage something, and now they've been able to rebuild themselves in just a couple years. Jimmy Butler's done it twice. The first time he wanted out of Chicago, ended up in Minnesota for Chris Dunn, Lauri Markkanen, and Zach LaVine. That trade was the kind of deal where you go, is there hope that one of these guys could be something? LaVine is something. I'm not sure it's the front man of a good team. Markkanen, I'm probably less certain of, and Chris Dunn isn't even there anymore. And then Jimmy Butler, a year later, was like, hey, you know what? I don't want to be in Minnesota anymore. And they moved him to Philadelphia for Robert Covington, Dario Saric, and Jared Bayless. None of those guys are on the team. But Minnesota did pick up some pieces, flipping Covington later on to Houston. The most surprising demand probably ever is the Kawhi one. I mean, Kawhi, we were like, he's a perfect Spur. He gets it. He just hangs in the back. Doesn't need all the shine. Like, no, actually, he wants all that stuff, and he doesn't want to do it in San Antonio anymore. So there were different rumors about who he could have ended up being aligned with, trades that did or didn't happen, depends on who you believe, but he ends up in Toronto with Danny Green. So it was Danny Green and Kawhi for DeMar DeRozan, Jakob Poeltl, and a pick that became a guy that we still don't know anything about. That's a tough return for a player in Kawhi who looks like, at times, I would say the last couple of years, as if he were maybe the best player in the NBA. So you knew you were going to lose that one, but that one's a big L for San Antonio. Paul George, Chapter 2. Let's check in on that. That was just a year ago where after his year in Oklahoma City saying, I'm home, I like fishing. Nope, I'm out of here. I want to go to the Clippers. And he ends up there and gets Kawhi to the Clippers as well. So if you look at this deal is about the now, a sign of the times in the NBA where it feels like people are just handing you handfuls of picks to try to pull a deal off. And we don't know how to grade this one right now. And actually, I think this is the kind of deal that could be horrifying, or maybe it's worth it if the Clippers pull this off. And again, they can always argue the Paul George transaction led to the Kawhi transaction. So it was really like getting both players. The Clippers gave up Danilo Gallinari, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, and 5 picks and 2 potential swaps. So this could be 7 first-rounders. I don't even know what to do with that right now, other than other teams seem to be doing it a little bit more. So this could be one of those historic trades where you'll see if it works out for Oklahoma City. If we're talking years from now going, my gosh, the Clippers are still giving up all these picks and it didn't work out, and Kawhi decided to bounce early, you'll say no one will ever do this kind of deal again. I don't know. I could see that happening, but we don't know the answer to that right now. The last one I want to talk about, Anthony Davis, forcing his way out with his agents out of New Orleans to the Lakers. No one was surprised by this, but let's remind ourselves what the deal may or may not have been when it actually happened. Lonzo Ball looked like a bust. Now, he looks like a bust again, but he had a nice run there with the Pelicans during the normal regular season where I still think there's hope that he can be a nice player. Brandon Ingram went from, I see the talent, but I'm not sure, to then questionable medical future, to now a max guy on a rookie extension where you're thinking, all right, he may not win a championship as the number 1 player, but he's certainly talented enough to be the number 2 on a really good team. So the trade looks like it's worked out for the Pelicans, and on top of that, 3 first-round picks, where one of those ended up being in the lottery where they were able to move that around and add some other pieces. And by the way, those are nice pieces. Like, you've got something. That one thing that you can maybe bank on that's not going to replace Anthony Davis, but can be a big part of your future, like a Brandon Ingram. That's what everybody's hoping to do with any of those trades. And sometimes it happens, and sometimes you're the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Kyrie deal. But even with the price that the Pelicans got in return for Davis, if I'm the Lakers, you do this all day, every day for Anthony Davis, and that championship just proved it. So does this mean if you're a Rockets fan, you should be pumped to trade James Harden because the losses aren't as bad historically? No. I mean, there's going to be terrible trades again. I mean, that Cavs trade was only 3 years ago. The Lakers trade, I don't know. That ends up being a big price. Who cares? You got Anthony Davis. But looking back at some of the old trades, this isn't Vince Carter to the Nets, where the Raptors ended up with Alonzo Mourning for 30 games, Eric and Aaron Williams, and a couple first-rounders that amounted to nothing. That was a terrible trade. I'm just telling you, there are some moments from time to time where you're like, oh, that's not a terrible piece to bring back. You know what's funny about researching all of these trades is going back and looking at the Dwight Howard, Bynum, Iguodala, Aaron Aflalo trade. Because if you were to look at those 4 teams involved and try to figure out who won it, it wasn't the Lakers with Dwight. It definitely wasn't the Sixers with Bynum. Denver had Iguodala for a year. The most unlikely winner of that trade may have been the 4th team in the Orlando Magic. So you never quite know how this is going to play. But we do know this. If you're trading a top 5, top 10 guy, it's just to what degree you lose the trade, not if you ever win it.